Same-sex marriage and political correctness. Are they really connected? Same-sex marriage is only about love, or is it? One disturbing trend that can be seen in countries that have legalized same-sex marriage is the radical restructuring of language. Let's look at some examples. Canada legalized same-sex marriage in 2005. Then, in 2016, University of Toronto professor Jordan Peterson refused to refer to transgender students or staff by the pronouns they, or ze, or zer. He preferred to use he or she, and was warned that if he continued, he could breach the Ontario Human Rights Code and would suffer consequences. California legalized same-sex marriage in 2013. Then in October 2017, a law was passed that penalizes healthcare staff who do not refer to patients by the pronoun that matches their chosen gender rather than their biological sex. The United Kingdom legalized same-sex marriage in 2013. Several years later, Brendan O'Neill, editor of the UK magazine Spiked, warned that while same-sex marriage presents itself as a civil rightsy issue, it has this really ugly, intolerant streak to it. But those promoting same-sex marriage said it would only be about love and inclusion. No one said anything about restructuring language or intolerance. So it's just not that simple as saying that same-sex marriage will have no long-term consequences. But it's only words, right? Now some may say, what's the big deal? What does it matter whether or not someone wants to be called he, ze, or even it, for that matter? Well, to answer that, let's hear from our two protagonists. Jordan Peterson, the psychology professor, says, I've studied authoritarianism for a very long time, for 40 years, and they're started by people's attempts to control the ideological and linguistic territory. And Brendan O'Neill, the news editor, sums it up this way. Those who say they're only words, who cares, clearly don't know their Orwell. The policing of language is very often a policing of attitudes, a re-engineering of societal values so that they better accord with the elite's view. So what's the problem? Well, firstly, words have meanings, and those meanings are important. Secondly, whenever you change the meaning of a word, you change how it's used. And finally, if you change the meaning of enough words, or of words that are important enough, such as husband or wife, mother or father, or man or woman, you actually change the culture. The mortality of merit. In 2016, the UK BBC launched a diversity and inclusion strategy that aims to have 8% LGBT workforce by 2020. Then on the 10th of October 2017, Australia's Daily Telegraph reported that the Australian Federal Police now has a diversity and inclusion strategy which wants LGBTI members to reflect 10% of the total Australian Federal Police workforce by the end of 2020. But this raises a number of questions. How will they know if someone is LGBT when they apply unless the applicant is specifically asked? And what happens if someone is out and proud heterosexual? Does that actually count against them? And secondly, what does sexual orientation have to do with being a policeman or woman or a TV employee? Shouldn't merit be the only criterion? And finally, LGBT people make up a maximum of 3% of the population. So if the selection process is purely merit-based, how do you get 8 or 10% of a workforce from only 3% of the population? So it's political correctness, pure and simple. And the last 10 years have seen a progressive increase in political correctness and a relentless push for same-sex marriage. Is this really just a coincidence? So again, it's not that simple as saying that same-sex marriage will have no consequences. So what does this have to do with pronouns? Well, in Canada and California, people are being told what they must say after same-sex marriage was legalized. And in the UK, employers are being told who they must hire after same-sex marriage is legalized. Well, in Australia, a government agency is being told who they must hire just as the push for same-sex marriage becomes stronger and stronger. So it's not that simple as saying that legalizing same-sex marriage and increased political correctness are unrelated. An overseas experience tells us that this will only escalate if same-sex marriage is legalized. So what's the bottom line? In countries that have legalized same-sex marriage, political correctness has gone mad. We are seeing this here in Australia even before same-sex marriage laws have been passed. And if this is happening before same-sex marriage is legalized, imagine what it will be like if same-sex marriage is made the law of the land. So the bottom line is that same-sex marriage is just too big a risk to take. So for the sake of your own freedom to agree or disagree, you must vote no.